The Dorkening and all affiliated shows are not intended for anyone under the age of 18. The following may contain discussions or scenes that have adult situations, graphic violence, nudity, strong sexual content, and graphic language. This show is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised.
Everyone thinks because you're a zombie, you don't know good coffee. Well, they're wrong. We have very active lifestyles. It's not all wandering the countryside aimlessly or scaring passing motorists. And we all love a good cup of joe. And there's only one brew that gets my seal of approval. Deadly Grounds coffee is my guilty pleasure. Bold, robust, delicious. It's coffee that can wake the dead. With over a dozen different roasts and flavors, Deadly Grounds can satisfy the most finicky of coffee addicts. The aroma is so intoxicating. It brings all of my neighbors out of the woodwork. Deadly Grounds coffee. Coffee to die for and zombie approved. It's good to get a little deadly. Use the front door! Oh, they're so disgusting.
Persons under 18 will not be admitted.
I'm choosing to ignore the cuts and bumps and bruises. I'm cruising through these haters, leave them looking stupid. They foolish if they think they'll ever hear my conclusion. I'm through with all these part-timers and their excuses. I'm bruising eagles left and right every time I do this. I'm shooting for the top, no I'll never settle what you did. The future's in my hands, my grip will never loosen. My crew is ready to obtain the absolution, removing any doubt that we was ever fooling.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another kick-ass episode of Still Toking with.
Voice in your head is back.
Fuck. It is, too. I don't know where it is. It's here. I hear it. It's not good. But what is good is the show tonight. We have an amazing guest with a ton of knowledge. I don't want to spoil it because that's not what I do. But let's welcome the man, the myth, the flashy of the flashiest, Mr. Jeffrey Mark. How are you, brother?
You wear a couple of sparkles, and right away you get. Anyway, I just felt I was feeling teal today, so I'm awash in teal sparkles. Hey, everybody! Hey, co-hosts, and I'm really looking forward to our guest.
I am as well.
I am a big fan of Bob Hope's and his history. I'm also a big fan of the wonderful entertainers who gave so much of themselves during World War II in Korea and Vietnam to entertain our troops, putting themselves in harm's way. And I'm glad we're doing this at this time of the year and this time of history. So I'm happy to be here. I hope you guys are too. And I'm GEOFF, calling Jeff, JEFF. Come in.
Well, yeah. Hello, I'm back. I was on vacation last week. I think I missed a good show too. I'm kind of bummed out about that. You know, but I'm looking forward to tonight. You know, when I was researching this dude, I'm like, this guy's got to be fucking like 85 years old with all the shit he's done. You know, I mean, seriously, I couldn't fucking keep up with that. You know, unbelievable. But yeah, I'm looking forward to talking. Well, let's just bring him right in, Mr. Tim Gray.
Hi guys, how are you?
Hey, Tim.
Thank you for having me on. I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
Well, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on and talk about, you know, all the great stuff you've done. Over 40 documentaries regarding, you know, World War II and things like that. But I do want to say he's a New England native, people. Ha! Ha!
Go
Wrong
Sox!
state, you know,
Go
wrong
Sox!
state, but okay. You know what I mean?
I just had to bring it up right away, you know.
Yeah.
I'm almost New England. Brooklyn is almost.
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 Close, but no cigar.
You live in the middle of the desert.
Now, but I was brought up.
I know. I'm just giving you crap because that's what I do, you know. But this year marks the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people even know that.
Right.
No, and that's why I brought it up right at the start, because, you know, most people watch the show. They'll tune in, they'll tune out, they'll tune in, they'll tune out. They'll go back and rewatch it later, or they'll listen to it on podcast. So I want to get it right out in the beginning, because the attention span could be that of a gnat to some people. So yeah, let's get it right out there.
Friends, he's not talking about you. He's talking about the other guy, not you.
I said some people. I didn't say our people. I said some. You know, it's that person that stumbles across the show later on and they go, oh, this might be interesting. And then they go, oh, wait, squirrel. You know, and then they come back to it. But 80
I've been known
years.
To do that.
You do that all the time.
This is like the Hollywood Squares. I mean, this is like tuning in. I'm waiting for Rich Little to come into the middle and we can talk, you know, this is like the Hollywood Squares that I grew up on.
I'll be seeing Rich in about 2 weeks. I'll let him know you said that.
Yeah. And Paul Lynn, rest his soul.
All right, so the first thing I want to ask you, Tim, and this is probably going to be a very, very difficult question, because I want you to keep it under a 2-minute answer.
Oh, sure.
Okay. Yeah, give us a very brief introduction of who you are.
I don't even know the answer to that question. Who am I? I'm a former television sportscaster who had a real passion for World War II when I turned 6 years old. And when I got out of TV news, I wanted to do documentaries on World War II. So we've done 40. They're all narrated by celebrities, everybody from, you know, Kevin Bacon to Darius Rucker to Luke Bryan to Tom Brokaw, Gary Sinise, Jim Nance, Keith Morrison from Dateline. So we've done a lot of films, but we've also had some amazing voices through the years since we started doing this in 2006. And, you know, they don't teach World War II much anymore in the school. So we've kind of become a conduit for education and educating teachers and students that there was a World War II, and that many of the things that we're going through today in the world resonate with that time. So history rhymes.
Right. Real quick, you just brought up a good point that you know that they're not really teaching that much anymore.
No.
Is there a reason why? Because when I went to school, we were taught about that.
Yeah, it's the teachers. The teachers are under so much pressure these days with standardized testing and everything else, that in a lot of schools, especially public schools, history is always the first thing that gets cut. Then they start to cut the arts, and then they start to cut sports. So history always seems to be on the chopping block in a lot of situations, and not as important as math and science and other things. And, you know, I get that, but, you know, history is so important in terms of how we evaluate ongoing issues that are happening in the world today, and making a link between what's happening in the 21st century to what's happening in the 20th century, or what did happen, and how we learn from those lessons of World War II. And there are just so many lessons.
No, I 100% agree with you on that. You know,
it's a shame, actually, because
yeah,
it's really
I mean,
history, in my opinion.
History being, we learn from our history.
Yes, we do.
We learn what to do, what not to do.
Exactly.
And when you start cutting that,
Yeah.
and like you said, it usually gets history first, and then your arts, and then your sports.
Yeah.
Well, why is that? Shouldn't sports be cut first? Oh wait, no, because they can make $1 billion a year playing baseball.
Yeah, I mean it's just one of those things. That's the way it is. It's not that way in Europe. You know, in Europe is a lot older than the United States. I mean, we're 250 years old. Europe emphasizes history, and they've been through so much drama in Europe throughout the centuries with their history that they emphasize that this needs to be talked about so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. And that's why I'm always like willing to talk to people about the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, Vietnam, you know, other things that have happened that maybe, you know, don't have the limelight like World War II did and weren't necessarily supported by people at home, but they're still a part of our history. And you need to be able to have an open dialogue about the things, as you said earlier, that happened that were good and the things that happened that were bad. And that's just an important part of living and understanding. Right. Everyone on this call tonight has made mistakes. So if you don't learn from the Civil War, you don't learn from slavery, you don't learn from a lot of these things, then, you know, you just don't want to be at a point where it's all forgotten and it starts to repeat itself.
Right.
How do you think those decisions have affected the youth of today?
The youth of today don't know much about history. History to them, I mean, there are even students today who don't know anything about 9/11. And we're talking 2001. To them, 9/11 could have happened 200 years ago. They just don't know. So I'm always a big proponent of those teachings and having the dialogue, so students at an early age can recognize what's wrong and what's right, and the things we've done great as a country and the things maybe we've come up short. But not just here in the United States, in other countries as well. Whether that be Italy in World War II or Germany in World War II or Japan during World War II. These are the places that I focus my attention on. And there's always that simmering undercurrent that these things could happen again. Could there be another Holocaust? Well, yeah. I mean, if you don't know there was a Holocaust, or you've never heard of Auschwitz or Dachau or some of the camps, then yeah, it's all new to you. So you need a reference point, and history provides that. So
do you think that Europe really teaches the history because the war happened in that area?
Yeah, that's
you know,
part of it. Yeah.
And because we're in the United States, they don't teach it as much because it didn't happen on our soil. I mean,
yeah, I mean,
I think that's pretty fucked up, to be honest. Excuse my French, but
no, it's okay. That wasn't French, by the way. I think that was Norwegian.
Oh, maybe it was.
Yeah, but yeah, I think it's you know, Europe's history goes back centuries. I mean, long before World War II.
Right.
So it's just how a society evaluates what's important. And I know math is important. I know science. I know the environment. I know all these things are important. But I just always feel like teachers should make room for history. And if you're in America and you want to focus on American history, that's great. That's fine. But it needs to be part of the curriculum, and we need to be able to talk about it in more than just a day. And that's
I think parents need to get more involved with the education too.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been the case. Yeah,
you know, it's always been like that. I mean, my parents were very involved.
Yes.
You know, in my education, making sure that I was doing what I was doing, and you know, I don't see that today. You know,
no, I think parents are a little bit more hands off today. And you know,
being a baby boomer, my education, and I'm talking just, you know, public schools. I didn't go to anything private or anything, but history, knowing about World War II, our wars, our history. We were shown the films of the different camps getting liberated, and the bodies and all that awful, awful, awful stuff.
Yeah.
Back then, you know, in the last century, that seemed to be terribly important that we learn. But there seems to have been a shift in our culture away from knowledge is power, which is why I'm so glad that there's a Tim Gray out there who's making films, because if it's not being covered in school, at least someone is presenting the material in an entertaining way, but in a very factual way.
Yeah.
Because it's terribly important.
It is.
Not to our history, but to today. I don't mean any specific thing happening in politics today. I just mean human beings need to know where they came from and where they're going.
Yeah.
So I'm really pleased with your work and with you, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Jeff.
I second that.
Thank you. It's a labor of love when you meet these, as you guys have, when you meet these veterans. I mean, they're a generation that saved the world, but they don't walk around with T-shirts that say, I saved the world. They want to be as removed from that as possible. And they're just so humble. And the things I've learned from them have made me a better person. And those things include being humble, working together as Americans did during the war to solve a huge problem, and putting aside politics. You have a Democratic president in FDR, putting aside the politics to win a war, do something that's beneficial to America as a whole, not based on a political party. And that's why I think people are still very interested in World War II, because it's one of the rare times in our history where we've come together as a nation to solve a problem together.
Tim, you bring up a wonderful point.
Yeah.
During World War II, there was rationing, there were metal drives, there were scrap drives, there were war bonds being sold to help pay for the war.
Yeah.
People had victory gardens, growing their own vegetables.
Yeah.
They didn't drive cars. Is this trip really necessary?
Mm-hmm.
Save rubber, save oil, save gas, save coffee. Was there anything like that after World War II? Because I don't see it in my looking through things. And why do you think we stopped doing that?
Well, one of the interesting things about World War II is that we were attacked. So after Pearl Harbor, America was all in, because it was a surprise attack at Pearl Harbor on the island of Oahu. And Americans, if they fight, they like to fight fair. So believe it or not, on December 6, 1941, about 85% of Americans did not want to get involved in the war in Europe with Hitler, even though England was on the brink of collapsing at that point too. They didn't want to get involved in another European war. So all of a sudden, Japan attacks us on December 7th, 1941, and we were just all in. If you remember the feeling after September 11th, September 12th, everybody, there were no Republicans, there were no Democrats. Everybody was on the steps of the Capitol singing patriotic songs. And that was as close to the feeling of World War II, I think, as this country had been since 1941, since Pearl Harbor. And that lasted a while. It didn't last as long as the remaining 4 years of World War II did for the United States. But there was a sense of that in America, that, wow, we've been sucker punched. We have to respond. We got to go get bin Laden. We got to, we're going to be fighting this. And everyone was patriotic. And that kind of went away after a while as that long war dragged on. So it's hard to replicate the feeling in the country on December 8th, 1941, when Roosevelt made his address to Congress. It's hard to replicate that now. And, but as close was 9/11. That's about as close as we've been. Korea wasn't like that. We weren't attacked. Vietnam wasn't like that. We weren't attacked. The first Gulf War, not so much. 9/11, definitely. So it's just knowing your history and understanding it.
You've chosen in your, I believe, latest, which is the one talking about entertainers during World War II, specifically Bob Hope and his troupe, to talk about the people in my business, our business, who gave of themselves. What made you choose the topic?
This being the end of the 80th anniversary, the end of World War II, we do about 4 documentary films a year. We wanted one to focus on something other than just what we usually focus on. And to me, the morale in war has always been an interesting thing, and the USO in war, and the importance of laughter for these men and women who are serving overseas. And there was no greater impact of anybody than Bob Hope at the beginning of World War II and through World War II, and what he did with his troupe. But it wasn't just Bob. He was the Pied Piper for Hollywood. Hollywood with the Hollywood Canteen, and then Hollywood with their stars not only entertaining but also going off to serve, like Jimmy Stewart and Clark Gable. Major League Baseball players, NFL football players. It was just such a patriotic time. Everyone wanted to be involved. And FDR told some people like Mickey Rooney and Bob Hope and Bing Crosby and Humphrey Bogart, you're better off for this country. You can do more as an entertainer than you could ever do in a foxhole in Italy for this country. Bob Hope wanted to fight. He offered to fight. And FDR said, do what you do best. And that's what he did. And that's what a lot of other entertainers did. But Hollywood, you saw some of the top directors in Hollywood leave. John Huston, John Ford, William Wyler, George Stevens, Frank Capra. They all left Hollywood to get involved in the war effort, making documentaries, training films. So everybody in the country joined in. And then Hollywood joined in as well. And it was just a very patriotic time in Hollywood.
There was a thing called Hollywood Caravan.
Yes.
You had Harpo Marx and Groucho and Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz and Lana Turner and all of these wonderful people going by choo-choo train across the country selling bonds.
Yeah.
It's
they wanted to be involved.
It's an amazing thing to look back on. I've never seen anything like that in my lifetime.
No, and I don't think you ever will again. I was just
going to ask you that. Do you think that's possible in today's world?
That was the perfect storm back then, where because of you only had radio, you had movies, you had newspapers. There was no television at that point. So if you wanted to be entertained, you were listening to the radio. And there was a lot of war information and a lot of programs. Bob Hope was the #1 radio star at the time. World War II broke out with the Pepsi show on NBC. So yeah, there wasn't the social media. There wasn't the streaming. There was just, the basic media at that time. TV didn't really come out until after the war, even though it was developed before the war. It didn't come out in mass production until after the war. So you only had a few mediums to get news and information. And most of the people got it, by going to the movies and seeing the newsreels or for reading the papers. It was a golden age of media as well, when you really think about it.
Right. Tim, there's a wonderful story about how Bob Hope found his military audience. And it involves his radio show going out of the studio. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, his producer at the time asked him one day, what do you think about taking the NBC radio show on the road to a military base at March Field in California? And Bob had never performed in front of the military before. He didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, these guys weren't fighting a war yet. It was before Pearl Harbor. They were bored, just training. He didn't know what the reception would be. So he goes down to March Field, and it was just like, amazing. He loved it. They loved it. They started to take their show out on the road via train around the United States after that. But he found his niche that day at March Field, and they're like, we can do this, all over the country. We can take this live radio show, and it's going to build up his audience. He knew that. He knew it would be building up his audience as well, whether it be then or in the future. But he did it for all the right reasons. And I think people say things and they always look at the 20th century with a 21st century lens, and you can't do that. But it was very genuine for Bob Hope and his troupe of performers, Jerry Colonna and Francis Langford and Patty Thomas and Tony Romano, his guitar player. They were all in it for the right reasons. And maybe we can talk about a little bit. I'll give you some examples of the right reasons later in the show, but it was very genuine. And that's one of the things I found out doing all this research. Bob Hope was an immigrant to the United States. He was born in Great Britain. He grew up in Cleveland. He became an American citizen. He loved his country, came up through vaudeville and then theater and then radio and then movies and TV and everything else. But he had a deep appreciation for what America represented and what it did for him. And I think that his tour and what he did was a byproduct of that.
Right. And you speak of the tour and everything that he did during World War II. He logged over 80,000 miles.
Yeah. It's crazy when you think about it. And this was before the jet age.
Yes. Right.
So you're on propeller-driven aircraft flying across the Pacific to Honolulu and then to islands most of us have never heard of before. The same to Europe, the same to North Africa, the same domestically around the country. So it's not like today where you fly in on your G4, you do a show and you go back to your mansion. I mean, it was 80,000 miles in a propeller-driven age in the middle of a world war where your
I was
plane
just going
could
to say,
crash, where you could be shot
down. Yeah.
So, I mean, that was 80,000 hard miles.
Yeah, and it wasn't just that. I mean, he would go to these places and he would do a show, but then he would go to the front lines as well.
Yeah,
to do a smaller show for the people that were there that couldn't come see him.
Not pretty amazing.
And that's special. That's special.
Yeah, he would entertain 20,000 on Guadalcanal, or he'd entertain 10,000 on some other small island, and then he would find out who couldn't come to the show. And he would make an effort. He and Jerry Colonna would hop in the back of a Jeep or a truck and get as close to the front lines as possible and put on a 12-minute show. They didn't want anybody to be left out. And they also visited all the hospitals every time.
I was going to ask that, yeah.
They didn't want those people to be left out. So they would go in and do a performance in the hospital and try to bring some laughter and smiles to these people who had been through hell.
The horrors of what they saw, I know, permanently scarred Frances Langford, who unfortunately drank too much because she couldn't handle what she saw. But she risked her life to be there.
Yeah, I mean, she was only 18, 19 years old when she's doing all this, and she's going into hospital wards and having to smile. Bob Hope would always say, you got to smile through this. As bad as it is, as bad as you go in there and you see people missing limbs and bandages head to toe, as bad as it is, you always have to smile. You have to be upbeat because that's what they need from you. And he would tell them that, but they saw some horrific things in those hospitals. And it's hard for an 18-year-old girl or 19-year-old girl to just keep smiling and singing or dancing and performing when you're seeing all that and trying to process all that.
Right. And I think this is a perfect segue for what you asked backstage, Mr. Mark, about being the devil's advocate. So I think because Tim just explained all that, this would be a perfect segue for that part of what you wanted to ask.
Okay, so I asked him before we went on the air, would it be okay if I brought up there are people through the years, not so much during World War II, but especially during the Vietnam years, who cast shade on Mr. Hope that he was only doing this for money, that our government was paying for his shows and paying his salary. And Mr. Hope didn't need the government to pay anything, number one. And he was risking his life going places. I just want to debunk, is there any thread of truth to that somehow Mr. Hope was sort of warmongering for his career? Because I'm tired of hearing about it. And you are the expert, so please.
I'm not the expert, but I can tell you from doing all this research and learning and reading about him that couldn't be further from the truth. He did this beginning in World War II, and he did it in Korea, but he didn't start getting much pushback until Vietnam. And then that was the time. Everybody was pushing back on everything in the 60s, whether you were a teenager or for the war, against the war, whatever it is. Everybody was pushing back in the 70s. Anybody who did anything in the 70s was catching the wind in some way. But he started this early in World War II, and he kept it going right through early 1990s in Afghanistan. And
he also started something for our troops in that the shows he did, not the ones that the video cameras got, were a little naughty and racy and adult.
Yes.
In order to pander to these young guys who were putting their lives on the line. The only one we have a film of is this wonderful, I think it's hysterical, with Patty Thomas, who was a beautiful young girl and a dancer.
Yeah.
And they, you know this already, Tim. You know what I'm going to say. And they're talking to the audience, and he's like interviewing her, and he's saying, some sky. And she said, some sky. Some clouds, some dew. I don't. And she turned around and walks off the stage.
Yeah.
Brilliant to me. Brilliant. This kind of, he was able to get away with adult stuff and not
Yes.
get shamed for it.
It was all in the eyes. It was all in his delivery. Because when you look at his delivery, I mean, he was really the first stand-up comedian. And the way he delivered the lines, it was very, look in his eyes, his eyebrows, the smirk on his face. He could get away with all that. And there was nobody better at that time than him for that. And that's why I always say all the comedians today owe a debt of gratitude to Bob Hope being the first stand-up comedian. Everybody from Jack Benny, right, through Johnny Carson and Letterman and John Mulaney and everybody who's around, today, because he really was that first person. But I think, a lot of it comes from his days of going to entertain the troops in a war that wasn't popular, like Vietnam. Vietnam was just not a popular war. And we made a lot of mistakes in Vietnam where that have been corrected since, where we lumped the soldier in with the politics. Right. And now when you see these men coming home and women coming home from overseas duty now at the airports, everybody's giving them a standing ovation. They're not being spit on. They're not being called baby killers, which was the reaction when they were coming home from Vietnam. So anything associated with Vietnam during that time, I think, had that negative connotation to it. And
Martha Raye almost lost her career for going to Vietnam and entertaining, because they said she was doing the wrong thing, as if entertaining Americans who are putting their lives on the line is somehow making the war last longer. It's just ridiculous.
Right. So, and the reason I wanted to segue that is because you wanted to debunk warmongering, whether it was Bob Hope or any entertainer, excuse me, folks. It's in the newest documentary. It's called Morale.
It's so
that's
important.
Why they did it.
It's so
that's
important.
Why they did it.
One of the things that we really learn in this film is that when Bob Hope would go to a small Pacific island or to go to England to an air base or North Africa, those guys, the men were doing all the fighting. The women were in support roles during World War II. They weren't allowed in combat. Those guys had just come through a horrific fight. They're facing their next horrific fight. So he comes in, and for an hour or 2 hours, for as long as he's at that base, they're laughing, they're joking, they're getting respite. They're getting some time to not think about what they just went through and what was coming. And that's what the morale part, you have to have. Most veterans we interview today, they only want to talk about the funny parts of World War II. We got to really get them to open up about the things they did and saw, but they'll talk forever about Bob Hope. They'll talk forever about seeing the beautiful girls or seeing Big Crosby or something along those lines. Those are the memories that they take. And I think that's the same for veterans. Any veteran who comes home today, they don't want to get into the nitty gritty, but they'll tell you that Gary Sinise brought his band out to Iraq and they played and it was great for 2 hours. We forgot about we're out in the desert. So,
Tim, was World War I the first American war where I know that Al Jolson and Sophie Tucker and a very few others went to camps in this country to entertain?
Yeah.
Is that where it starts in World War I?
That's really where it starts. With we were only in World War I for a year. I mean, we're in from 1917 to 1918. So it wasn't like World War II where you have 4 years of fighting and filling time and everything like that. But yeah, I mean, when you really think about it, that's in a small way, that's where it kind of built the momentum. And then 20 years later, there's World War II. And, Bob basically took his vaudeville show and brought it on the road during World War II. They were singing, dancing, laughter. That's a vaudeville show. And he perfected that and took it on the road. And it's really nice to just read about the reason he did that. And the reason he did that is because he knew he could make an impact that way. And a lot of people in Hollywood did the same thing.
So
I wanted to ask you, do you actually know the number of how many World War II veterans are still with us today?
I do. There were 16 million who served in World War II for the United States. There are roughly 60,000 left today. And the great majority are 99 or 100. We ran into a guy at our museum in Rhode Island today. We have a museum, World War II museum, and he came in, he was 97, and he came in at the end of the war and was young, but most of them are 99, 100 to 105.
Wow.
And there's that many. There's still that many, huh?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it doesn't sound like a lot. You know, when you think 16 million who served, now you're down to 60,000, and these guys are all in the final stretch.
I'm looking at the age perspective. You know what I mean?
Well, right, because you figure most of these people that went to war were young. They were 18, 19, 20 years old.
12 years old.
But it was 80
12,
years ago.
Right. 80 years ago.
Yeah.
Right.
You know?
So they're logically going to be up there. The youngest American to serve was a kid named Calvin Graham. He was 12. He served in the Pacific, and he lied about his age. Big kid from California. Big kid from Texas. Excuse me.
Wow.
We did a film on a 14-year-old who became a paratrooper because he saw a movie called Parachute Battalion, and he was 14 years old, and he was 6 foot, 200 pounds from California, and that he went and signed his dad's name and lied and ended up in combat when he was 15 in Sicily. And that's the way we educate these students when they come in. We when the kids come visit us to tour our museum, we talk to them about what their age group would have been doing during the war, and then they can relate a little bit better.
Now, where's the museum?
It's in South Kingstown, Rhode Island, the southern part of Rhode Island, about 20 minutes from Newport. And so we have about 6,000 World War II artifacts. I've got a lot of really weird stuff. I've got Hitler's German Shepherd, Blondie's dog collar from World War II. We have a shovel that Hitler used to christen the Autobahn in Germany. So we got some really weird stuff.
Just real quick, plug the name of the museum, because
it's called the International Museum of World War II in South Kingstown, Rhode Island. Okay. So so it's a really cool place.
So to all our viewers and listeners, make sure if you're in that area and you are a history buff, see, now I personally never knew this existed.
Yeah, it's kind of
it's like that's like maybe an hour from me.
Yeah.
So you'll probably see me at some point.
Great.
Because I told you before the show, I'm a huge history buff. Yeah. I shouldn't say I love that. The war stuff. I love the history.
I love learning about that time period.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's the way I am too. It's just fast. That whole time period, the good, the bad, the ugly, the evil, the heroic. I mean, it had everything. And most of the people who died during World War II were civilians. And any war or anything, the civilians end up paying the biggest price. Soviets lost, 28 million people in World War II. And people don't realize that, 28 million. And they lost 28 million people.
Right.
Other than Bob Hope, Tim, in doing your research, I mean, off the top of my head, I know Al Jolson did an awful lot during World War II. Mm-hmm. Jack Benny did an awful lot. But who were some of the names who maybe we don't know? I don't mean who served. That's a whole different list of people. But who entertained? Can you think of some, big names?
Everyone from, Marlene Dietrich. I mean, when you talk about the Hollywood Canteen, and I don't know if people know about that, but it was a place in California where service members could go on their way to the Pacific. They could stop and they could dance with a famous Hollywood actress, or they could get their coffee served by Lucille Ball, or it was based on a club in New York City, but it became such a big thing that you saw most of the Douglas Fairbanks and others, whoever was in Hollywood would end up going to the canteen. And I thought that was one of the shining examples of what Hollywood did, is that they got their stars to mingle with people who were going off to battle.
For anyone who cares, the one in New York was called the Stage Door Canteen. And films were made, 2 films about the Stage Door and about the Hollywood Canteen. And you can see the stars who were actually, Johnny Weissmuller was a busboy.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
This everything that was done by volunteer, by stars and celebrities, and I'm proud of our community for what we did.
Yeah, Hollywood really, right up to the heads of the studios. A lot of the heads of the studios at that time were Jewish, and they were having family members back home who were trying to get out of Europe and were being caught up in the Holocaust and everything else. So Hollywood had a shift of not making fun of Hitler. But then when we got into the war, it became, open season for everybody from the Three Stooges to, whoever else, Charlie Chaplin, everybody else. So Hollywood really got in it for the right reason. And the USO is still around today and a shining example of country music stars who go on these tours overseas now and just bring some of America, to the guys, the men.
I've sung for the USO. It's an honor.
Yeah.
It's an honor.
Yeah.
So we've spent the last 40 minutes this far talking about, the documentaries and talking about Bob Hope in the USO and stuff. But real quick, you have won numerous awards for your documentaries.
I'd rather talk about Bob Hope.
Well, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah. But like I said, this show is designed to be about the guest, and you are the guest. So we're talking about the recipient of the American Public Television National Programming Excellence Award, but 6 regional Emmy Awards as well.
Thank you
for your work. That alone speaks volumes about you.
Well, thank you.
And your work for what you do. So I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, my
biggest accomplishment. It's a good start. I think you got to keep on going.
I know. Thank you. I've got a wife and 5 kids. I have to keep going. So yeah.
I have a wife and 6 kids. I got you beat.
You got me beat. I don't think there was anyone that crazy out there.
My great grandfather. Does that count?
I want to flip this a little. And
sure.
How did Bob handle 30,000 letters a week?
He had a great secretary named Marjorie Hughes back in California, and she would go through a lot of the letters and pick out the ones that really she thought he should see. And they ran the gamut, with soldiers sending him jokes to use in his radio show, to families writing letters saying, "My son was killed 2 days after seeing you on the island of Pavuvu. I want you to know how important it was to me that he was able to be entertained on the last couple of days of his life." So there was this amazing treasure trove of letters, but they were getting 35,000 a week when he was on the radio, and he was still a top 10 box office star at that time as well. So, but most of the letters are just letters written by servicemen asking him to send them a fruitcake to Italy, because Bing hasn't replied to their letter, and they thought they'd try Bob. And Bob seems like a great guy and friendly, and that's the things they would write him. But some of the letters were just really, really somber too.
Now, do they still exist?
Yeah. Linda Hope put together a book a few years ago, Dear Bob, it's called, and they're probably some of the best letters that he received running the spectrum.
Wonderful, wonderful book.
Yeah, it's a great book, and you can feel the emotions coming out of the letters that were written by widows or mothers who had lost a son, or just people who were serving who just wanted to write to Bob because they thought he was a friend.
I'm
going to buy that book.
Yeah.
I'll get it. It's worth it.
Yeah.
I don't think she did this during World War II, but certainly at one point, Dolores started joining him.
Yeah.
On these things.
Not World War II, but yeah, he risked his life a lot of the time, and being a good Catholic, I'm sure she said a lot of extra novenas when he was flying in the Pacific and heading to the battle zones. But as far as during the war, she's taking care of Linda and her brother at home. Linda Hope is 6 years old, and she doesn't know why her father's coming and going, getting in the plane, coming off a plane, getting in a plane, coming off a plane. So Dolores had to explain to Linda what war was, and that's a tough conversation to have with a 6-year-old.
So was Linda and Tony at that point?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
And Linda, Daniel, I think too.
Linda has done a magnificent job, much like Lucy Arnaz has for her parents, of shepherding the history of Bob Hope's career and dealing with all the people who still want to ask questions and still want to use his name and his likeness. And she's just wonderful at it.
Yeah. That was one of my favorite, I think, interviews I've ever done, with just getting her perspective and what it was like, growing up. I mean, when you think Bob Hope, he's on the Mount Rushmore of when you talk about entertainers, and everybody knows his name. Not as many young people know it, and we're trying to remedy that. But yeah, it was a amazing life of giving back to his adopted country, and I really believe, and people can argue with me, and I really believe it just all came from the heart. You can't fake a lot of the stuff that he did during World War II, especially. You can't fake that. You can't fake the extra shows going up to the front lines, or almost dying in Alaska in a plane crash.
I was just gonna bring that up. He was almost killed on numerous two occasions.
At least two, and the Alaska one to me was probably the most dangerous, because when their plane went down in Australia, they lost an engine, but they were flying in a PBY Catalina, which is a plane that can take off and land on water. It was still, very difficult landing, and they survived. But in Alaska, they lost radio contact over Alaska. There were no lights to guide them to the airport, and they were out there just aimlessly flying in this thick cloud bank over Alaska. And just by chance, another plane came up behind them and caught their prop wash, and they radioed down, "We just caught prop wash from another plane that's not supposed to be up here." And they figured out in Fairbanks, I think it was Fairbanks, or it might have been Anchorage, that's probably the missing Hope plane. And they threw all the searchlights up, and they found the airport, and they landed. But they were putting their parachutes on. They thought they were going to have to jump.
Wow. And that's a desolate area up there.
It is.
Yeah.
If you've ever been up there, it's like you're going to run into a polar bear or something.
Yep.
It was it almost needed his own personal general to make each of these shows happen over, and people don't understand. He could do 4 or 5 different shows in one day, never mind in a week or a month. In each place, he found out who the commanding officers' names, and had jokes for every place, personal jokes, putting down the commanding to the officers to make the enlisted men, or the people who were not officers, laugh even more. Tim, was he already using the idiot cards at that point, or was it all memorization for him?
I think what I've seen of the films and everything is all memorization. And he would go in, and as you said, he would learn who the generals were. And he always liked to take down the officers in front of the enlisted men. He always wanted the enlisted men sitting in the front rows too. He would kick the generals out and say, the guys who are on the front lines get the best seats. And it was just he would do a ton of research. He and his writers would research where they were going. They would find out what the local haunts were, if there was a bar set up or something. So he personalized almost every performance he did to the location where he was. And that's
an enormous amount of work.
Yeah.
That's quite a feat without Google, man.
Yeah, without Google.
It was all word of mouth.
Yeah.
And he's got musicians, and he's got a dancer, and he's got a singer. And in some places where there was much larger, there were more people who came in just for a little while and was with him.
Yeah.
And he tailored the shows. And sometimes he was in a huge theater, and sometimes he was on the back of a truck.
Yeah. It ranged in size from like 30,000 at Guadalcanal down to, he did a show for 7 people after they crashed their plane in Australia. So the people who lived in the local community, they put on a performance. So you don't do that if you're faking it, if you're not into it. That just, all these little things just added up. And I learned even more about him, how genuine that all was. So you can't fake that kind of stuff.
The reason I asked about the cue cards was because there was this guy named Barney, you know this, Tim, Barney McNulty, who was his cue card guy. That started in Korea for sure. Yeah. And if Bob went to someone's party in Studio City in the backyard, hiding in the bushes, was Barney holding up cue cards for him for the jokes they'd written just for the party.
Yeah.
His memory was amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing. And he always remembered people's names, and he became that person when you looked at him, just because he addressed you. He heard you when you said your name. My name is Tim. And he would say, "Well, Tim, where you from?" And, it's always very personal with him. And that was interesting to see. So.
Right. So I want to spin this in a different direction real quick. So you have done over 40 documentaries on World War II, correct?
Yes.
Do you have a favorite And if you do, why?
I've got 40 children. If you ever said one of them is the favorite, you know.
Well, I do that all the time. I have 6.
No,
Right?
I know. I know. You know, they're all different topics. They span from the Holocaust through women in war. So to me, each one we do is different in the way we tell the story and the focus of the story and everything. So each one to me has its own value to how I feel about it. But, you know, we spent a lot of time in Normandy. We were just there a couple of weeks ago for the D-Day anniversary. We go to Pearl Harbor for the anniversary. And every time we go, the amount of veterans there get fewer and fewer. And so we just finished a film with Keith Morrison. You know, it sounds like almost like Dateline, but you got Keith Morrison narrating one of your World War II films, which to me is just like, you know, Nirvana.
Right.
But to have his voice with this really great film that we did about Bletchley Park, which was the breaking of Germany's Enigma code in World War II, it probably saved 14 million lives, shortened the war by 2 years, and nobody knows anything about it. So to me, those are the kinds of films that I like to tell, the ones that people just are like, God, I had no idea that was even a thing during World War II. And it saved 14 million lives, and the Germans never found out we were doing it. I'm like, yep, that's the story. And they're like, cool. So,
I'm gonna twist Ben's question a little bit.
oh no,
I
thought I got away from it.
Yeah, no. Well, I'm gonna twist it a little bit. Of those 40 some odd films that you've done, which one was the most difficult to research?
I think anytime you do anything on the Holocaust, it's difficult to research because you really want to get those numbers right.
Yeah.
Sometimes if we do a film on somebody who did something extraordinary during World War II, there's no written description of what he did. It comes from the veteran. There are no photos of what he did. There's no film of what he did in some small village in France. So you need to, as journalistically sound as possible, construct an accurate documentary telling the story in some way where no visuals exist. And those are the biggest challenges, because while World War II was the most filmed war in history and photographed, there's still a lot of smaller events that happen where there doesn't exist any of that. And that brings up the question of AI nowadays. And people are starting to go down that road of AI helping to fill in gaps. So
please tell me you're not.
If we use any AI, we always put it in as AI, AI recreation. And ethically, that's what you have to do. You don't want to pass something off as being when it happened on Iwo Jima if it didn't, if that's not how it happened. So the AI is going to be a challenge for everything moving forward, as you all know. And it's going to be up to us to decide what is real in the future and what is not real in the future. And that's a scary thing. That's a tough responsibility.
Right.
I have not yet had a chance to see your latest, the Morales, Miles, and Bob Hope. Yeah. I think I have it backwards. Miles Morale and Bob Hope.
Miles Morale, Memories, Bob Hope in World War II. Yeah. We made it nice and long.
Thank you for that. Have you done in your research, or would you want to do a bigger perspective about the entertainment industry during World War II?
Yeah, absolutely. I love everything about it. We have an artifact at our foundation. It's a World War II helmet with the Warner Brothers label on it. And those were what the guards had to wear around the studio because they thought the Japanese were going to bomb LA at some point. Right. So to me, I've always been fascinated, everything from Carol Lombard, who died during World War II and was Clark Gable's wife.
Weeks into the war.
Weeks into the war, she's on a bond coming back from Indiana in a bond rally, helping to raise money. And she's probably one of the most visible people who died during the war. But Hollywood really stepped out and put a lot on the line during that time with its actors, with its producers, directors. It's just a fascinating time where there's a great series on Netflix called Five Came Back. It's also based on the book. And it's about why guys like John Huston and John Ford left money-making jobs as directors to become, join the military and what they wanted to do.
Well, when you make that film about the entertainment industry in World War II, I want to be on your team.
Okay, I just got to find the money for it. So that's the part.
Speaking of making films, now I know we've said that you've made over 40. I have not watched all of them. I have seen a few.
Yeah.
Have you guys done a documentary on the Wind Talkers?
You know, we haven't. And there was so much coming out, and there's been a lot of stuff out on the Navajo code breakers, and we've met them before. We just haven't. You know, people have said, have you ever done anything on the role of Mexican Americans in World War II? And it's like, no, we haven't done that one either. But it's a great film. It's a potential film. So we try to tackle, you know, African American role in World War II. We've done that with the Tuskegee Airmen. Right. Women in World War II. We've done that. But yeah, I mean.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because the Navajo language and the code was their code was never broken.
No, it was never read by the Japanese at all. No.
So I was just curious if you guys had even entertained maybe a documentary about something like that. Because I mean, I found that extremely interesting.
I think there's only one original code breaker who's still alive. There was a Nicolas Cage movie that was done that wasn't a very good movie, but
Wind Talkers,
Wind Talkers. So it focused on that as well. But you know that even Nicholas will admit that wasn't his finest hour. So he actually told me that once when I ran into him at an aquarium. I said, I watched Wind Talkers. He's like, you're probably the only one. I'm like, so.
No, I actually watched it because, like I said before, I'm a huge history buff when it comes to the military side of things. And I was just curious, you know, it's Hollywood. Wind Talkers is Hollywood. You know, how much of that is real? I mean, I know the code was never broken, but how much of that was real? How much of that was Hollywood? And in that where a documentary comes in is true events.
It has to be factual. Yeah.
You know, and I'm huge on factual history like that.
We have to get it right. If we don't get it right and someone corrects us, I will pull the film from PBS and make sure we correct it. And people have done that over the years and said, oh, you know, this little thing didn't happen. I'm like, boom, pull it back, re-edit it, make sure it's correct. So it has to be right.
And that's why he has those Emmys, folks.
I bought them at a yard sale.
Right. So PBS is where you can view most of your films? Yeah.
And you can go to pbs.org as well, and they have the films. We also put our films up for free on our website. And we have a global app as well that has all of our films for free for students and educators and the public.
Okay. And I'm assuming then that those are all in the links.
They are in the show notes up above or down below. But while he's talking about it, plug your website real quick for the listeners that are too lazy to go over and read the show notes.
If they just Googled the World War II Foundation, our website would come up. And then all of our films that we've done in Europe and the Pacific and Holocaust are there. And there are also ways to download our app as well. So you can watch all of our films on Roku and Fire Stick TV and Apple, Android, everything.
I'll have to download that app.
Yeah, it's cool. I like it. We designed it a couple of years ago, and we wanted to have our own dedicated channel, and it's got all of our films up there, and so we love it.
Let's shout out that app one more time for the people that weren't paying attention.
It's the World War II or the WWII streaming channel. So if you go to Apple or Android and you just put in the WWII streaming channel, it should bring up our app on Google Play or iTunes or everything like that. So,
Tim, I've produced and directed and written about a dozen and a half documentaries in my lifetime. Yep. And I know the hard work that goes into it. Mm-hmm. I'm curious in doing research, because to make the kind of films you do, there has to be meticulous research.
Yeah.
Did you ever stumble upon a fact or a story and went, oh shit, I can't believe that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. All the time, every day.
Can you give us one?
You know, it's just, there are just so many stories that filter into you where you say, that would make a great feature film with Brad Pitt. You know, I mean, there are so many stories from World War II, and, you know, thankfully Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks and Brad Pitt and George Clooney and others like that recognize that. So they're still making the feature films about World War II, and the stories like Greyhound with Tom Hanks and on Apple TV. So, I mean, we're just talking about I can't divulge too much, but it was a story about somebody who was Jewish, who was killed in World War II and was buried. He was an American soldier. He was buried in a German grave for 80 years until they found him. And he was lying next to an SS officer in that German mass grave, and he was Jewish. And
Wow.
yeah, so there are just stories out there that still boggle your mind, and you say, if I had a trust fund, if I had a lot of money, I would like do your film in 10 seconds. You know, I'd love to do it, but you know how, Jeff, you know how documentaries are. Everything costs a lot of money.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, everything costs a lot of money.
Everything costs a lot of money.
So that's just wow. I'm just what you just said. It's in my head all of a sudden. You know, being buried in a mass grave.
You're Jewish
with Germans, first of all.
Yeah.
But to be Jewish, yeah, you know, if I had a trust fund, I would probably send archaeologists over there to bring home all the boys.
Yeah. Well, it's a really good story. I've already told Keith Morrison at Dateline. I go, you're doing this one. He already said okay, so it would be perfect for his voice.
Wow.
Oh,
amazing.
So, I got a museum I need to visit.
Yeah.
Yep.
And a whole shit ton of fucking documentaries to watch.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that. So, Jeff, when you try to find me, I mean, we don't tour again until September. So I have all summer to binge watch.
Yeah.
What I need to binge watch now.
Yeah, all three of us. Yes, absolutely.
Well, I hope you like them.
Fantastic. Yeah. I'm sure I've seen a couple of them. I just, you know, because I do watch them periodically.
Yeah. Well, I went through his IMDb. And it shows a lot of the documentaries that you've done. I'm like, I've seen that one.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you which, you know, and I'm like, oh, I've seen that because, like I said, I'm one of those people. I'll flip through, and I'll go, oh, what's this?
Yeah.
And then I'm sucked right into it.
Yeah.
You know, and then I look at the clock and I'm like 2 hours later. I'm like,
I know.
I was supposed to do something. What was I supposed to do? I don't know. Watch the next one.
Yeah.
Tim, if money were no object,
yes,
is there one documentary that just lives in your heart that if finances were unlimited, you'd like to do?
Yeah. There's a film. We were over in Austria and Germany last year, and we came across a 400-year-old castle in the town of Hartheim, Austria. And it's a beautiful castle. Looks like something from a Disney, princess film or something like that. But in that castle, the Nazis were pulling off their T4 program, which was the murder of all of the disabled in Europe. And this beautiful castle was a place where disabled people would be bussed, and they didn't know what was happening. They're very vulnerable, and they would be bussed there and immediately sent into the gas chamber. And then they would be cremated and buried in the backyard. And the families who sent their kids there thought they were sending them to a place where they would be taken care of. And family members would want to come and visit their children. And the Nazis would always say, oh, you're unfortunately, Hans has typhus or typhoid or whatever you want to call it. He's got a really bad cough. We can't let you see him. And in fact, he had been gassed and cremated, as soon as he got there. So they had this ruse going. And it was just the most, when you look at the faces of the people who were taken there and killed, that's the film I'm really wanting to do now, to tell the story about how their plan didn't only include the Jews and gypsies and homosexuals and everything else. It included disabled people, people with autism, people with intellectual disabilities, with Down syndrome. We went back with 28 college students, and all these college students were crying. And that tells me the impact that a story like that would have.
So I can hear our publicist Harlan speaking in my ears saying, so Tim, if people want to donate money towards having that film made,
thank you.
How do they get through to get you the dough? How does the dough get
they can just contact us through the World War II Foundation. And if they go to the website, there's a contact form on there. But to me, it's just something that I think resonates with a lot of things happening, today, a lot of things happening back then. It's a little known story of the war that sometimes gets overshadowed by the enormous,
I honestly had no idea.
Yeah, the enormous size of the
had no idea.
Holocaust. It just to watch all these college kids cry, and And it just was one of the things where we were there. We're like, this story needs to be told. So we got Josh Lucas to narrate it for us. He's an actor. He was in Sweet Home Alabama with Reese Witherspoon. He's also the voice of Home Depot. So we have him narrating that. It's just we gotta tell this story.
Right.
So you hear that, folks who have some dough to spare? Here is a film that needs to get made, and this is the man to make it.
Right. And up on the World War II Foundation, you should maybe make a link dedicated to that film.
Yeah. Right now we just have a donate button.
Well, right. I know you, because there's a lot of other things that the foundation does.
Yeah.
But
that's our priority right now. We've been reaching out to people in Austria and Germany and here in the United States, and it's been a slog trying to do it. But you just once in a while, goes back to your question earlier, you just hit on something to say this can still have ramifications today. And a story like that needs to show the depravity of what was going on at that time by the fascists and the Nazis and everybody associated with.
Yeah. So, wow. I'm kind of floored a little bit. So we're a little over time. Yeah, I know we're a little over time, which is not a big deal to us, but it, like we said before, it's about the guest. So I am going to spin this out. Mr. Mark, any last questions for this amazing guest?
I like your Emmy back there too.
Well, thank you, sir. But I more appreciate why you got yours than why I got mine. But thank you. I want to say God bless you, Tim Gray. You're telling stories that absolutely must be told. You're an incredibly talented man.
Thank you.
More than that, you used a word in this hour and 6 minutes that I don't hear very often. You said the word ethics. For that alone, I love you. Just, I really seriously, no jokes, would love people to visit your museum and to donate towards making this film that must be made.
Thank you.
And no, I think all three of us, this last story you told has touched us.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to think of questions or be funny because the topic is so ethically wrong.
Yeah.
And the story must be told. So,
and we know disabled people in our own lives, and whether they have autism or Down syndrome or some sort of intellectual disability, we all have them in our families. So if you can picture your son or daughter leaving you, and you were thinking that person's going to a place that's going to look after them, this was the opposite of that.
Right.
Horrific,
and you two were like, he's admiring your Emmy behind you, and I've been sitting here for the last hour and 7 minutes looking at the nostalgia behind him and going, that's a picture of James Dean between those two things back there.
That's Fonzie. That's Fonzie.
That's Fonzie. Oh man, I need new glasses. All right, I quit.
Yeah, I personally like the boom box. I like the boom box.
I saw the Happy Days memorabilia up there. I saw it all next to each other.
Yeah.
I look to the right. There's Happy Days.
That's my tribute to the 80s. I grew up in the 80s, so that's my tribute to the 80s.
Have Harlan introduce you to Anson Williams.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Because he's also a client.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's a wonderful guy. We should have him on our show sometime.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'd love that.
We've had Anson
on. Had him.
And we had Don Most on.
Oh, really?
Which Harlan was promoting at one point.
Oh, wow.
And I know Marion Ross very well. And,
really?
Yeah.
And actually,
Don Most, favorites.
Don is going to be in New York, I believe, in July with his new album.
Yeah.
He's touring his new album.
Wow.
So, Mr. Holman, any last questions for this?
Yeah, I do have a last question.
I figured.
You have basically traveled all over the world. Which place impacted you the most and why?
Auschwitz was probably the most impactful for us to be back there. In Poland, where 1.2 million people were killed at Auschwitz-Birkenau. We went to film in a gas chamber there, and I had to get out. I had to leave because I just felt the weight of all the people who had suffered there was kind of enveloping me. And then the island in the Pacific called Peleliu, where there was a really brutal battle between the 1st Marine Division and the Japanese. It was a battle that didn't really need to be fought, but they went ahead with it anyway, and it turned out to be one of the most savage battles in the history of the war. And everything from the fight is still there today. So you go back and you run into Japanese crashed fighter planes, Zeros, and tanks on their side, and live ammunition. And we did a film on it. It's known as the world's most well-preserved battlefield.
Wow.
Okay.
I know which one I'm starting with.
Yeah, try that one. That's a good one.
They're all good.
They're okay.
They're all good because they all tell a story that needs to be told.
Yeah.
You know? So, wow. That's insane. So I usually don't ask a last question,
Okay.
but I'm going to.
Okay.
We know that you are deep into World War II history and things like that, but what is something that you really geek out about aside from World War II?
I watch a lot of golf.
Well, that's just fucking weird.
Right? I wasn't
sorry.
expecting that.
I'm coming clean. I thought this was a therapy session. I like to, I like to be down near the water, and I like to golf when I can. And I like, watching crazy comedies on television. And so we do a lot with World War II, but like anything else, when you're downtime, you gotta focus on something else. So.
Right.
Well,
right.
come out to Palm Springs. We have some of the best golf courses.
I know you do.
Actually,
You do.
I do have a serious question, and
Uh-oh.
it just came to me. And if you have time,
Okay. Yeah.
doing all these documentaries, do you ever feel as though you have to desensitize yourself away from all the horrific shit that you're actually investigating or researching?
I never do. But when you submit your program for review to the network that's going to air it, they will come back with what things that they think might be a little uncomfortable for the viewer. And then we either argue about it or we do something to correct it so it's not as offensive. I just believe in history being history, and we don't even colorize our black and white photos. So the big thing for World War II is taking black and white film footage and photos and colorizing it. I won't do that. I'm but they didn't shoot it in color. It shouldn't be in color. The guy on the beach on D-Day didn't shoot that in color.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I fight those small battles, but it's just part of how I want to present it as accurately as possible.
Okay. Yeah. It literally just came to me, and I was like, oh shit, I know we're way over time, but this is something that I really wanted to ask.
Yeah.
In a follow-up to that, have you ever considered taking the things that the networks won't let you put on because they're offensive and putting them on a DVD for sale?
We don't, we give away all of our DVDs as a nonprofit, but no, I mean, I've never really thought of that.
And I don't mean for sale. So let's rephrase that. For a nonprofit, for a small donation, you get the uncut, unedited version that was too offensive for network television.
Yeah, the battles we fight aren't huge battles. So we'll come to a compromise we'll see some Japanese prisoners who have no clothes on, and you're just seeing them being marched as prisoners by the Americans, and you see their butts. You don't see anything else but their asses. And some networks will let that go, and others you gotta fix that. And
right. And that's what I mean by it, because you're telling a true story.
Yeah.
So that just kind of food for thought. Excuse me.
I like it.
But I don't want to keep Tim all night, so I am going to wrap out the show. I just ask you to hang tight until the stream closes, and then all that good stuff. So we want to thank Tim for taking time out of his busy schedule this evening.
You.
To come on and talk about, everything that we talked about. You got to go back and watch the show, folks. It's just way too much to talk about.
Amazing.
to all our veterans and first responders, we want to thank you for doing what you do so people like us can come up here and do what we do.
Mhm.
Right. So stay safe. We'll see you next week. Maybe if I can find the right button. Hold on. We're out of here.